This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life of Samuel Johnson, Volume 1, by James Boswell. Section 24. 1760. In 1760 he wrote an Address of the Painters to George III, on his ascension to the throne of these kingdoms, which no monarch ever ascended with more sincere congratulations from his people. 2 generations of foreign princes had prepared their minds to rejoice in having again a king who gloried in being, quote, born a Briton, unquote. He also wrote for Mr. Baretti the dedication of his Italian and English Dictionary to the Marquis of Abreu, then envoy extraordinary from Spain at the court of Great Britain. Johnson was now neither very idle nor very busy with his Shakespeare, for I can find no other public composition by him except an introduction to the proceedings of the Committee for Clothing the French Prisoners, one of the many proofs that he was ever awake to the calls of humanity, and an account which he gave in the Gentleman's Magazine of Mr. Tytler's acute and able vindication of Mary Queen of Scots. The generosity of Johnson's feelings shines forth in the following sentence. Quote, "It has now been fashionable, for near half a century, to defame and vilify the house of Stuart, and to exalt and magnify the reign of Elizabeth. The Stuarts have found few apologists, for the dead cannot pay for praise, and who will, without reward, oppose the tide of popularity? Yet there remains among us, not wholly extinguished, a zeal for truth, a desire of establishing right in opposition to fashion." Unquote. In this year I have not discovered a single private letter written by him to any of his friends. It should seem, however, that he had at this period a floating intention of writing a history of the recent and wonderful successes of the British arms in all quarters of the globe, for among his resolutions or memorandums, September 18th, quote, "Send for books for hist of war," unquote. How much is it to be regretted that this intention was not fulfilled? His majestic expression would have carried down to the latest posterity the glorious achievements of his country, with the same fervent glow which they produced on the mind of the time. He would have been under no temptation to deviate in any degree from truth, which he held very sacred, or to take a license, which a learned divine told me he once seemed, in a conversation, jocularly to allow to historians. Quote, "There are," said he, "inexcusable lies, and consecrated lies. For instance, we are told that on the arrival of the news of the unfortunate battle of Fontenoy, every heart beat and every eye was in tears. Now we know that no man eat his dinner the worse, but there should have been all this concern. And to say there was," smiling here, "may be reckoned a consecrated lie." Unquote. This year Mr. Murphy, having thought himself ill-treated by the Reverend Dr. Franklin, who was one of the writers of the Critical Review, published an indignant vindication in A Poetical Epistle to Samuel Johnson, A.M., in which he compliments Johnson in a just and elegant manner. Quote, "Transcendent genius, whose prolific vein ne'er knew the frigid poet's toil and pain, to whom Apollo opens all his store, and every muse presents her sacred lore. Say, powerful Johnson, whence thy verse is fraught with so much grace and such energy of thought, whether thy Juvenal instructs the age in chaster numbers and new points his rage, or fair Irene sees, alas, too late, her innocence exchanged for guilty state. Whatever you write, in every golden line, sublimity and elegance combine. Thy nervous phrase impresses every soul, while harmony gives rapture to the whole." End quote. Again, toward the conclusion, quote, "Thou then, my friend, who seest the dangerous strife, in which some demon bids me plunge my life, To the Aeonian fount direct my feet. Say where the nine thy lonely musings meet. Where warbles to thy ear the sacred throng, thy moral sense, thy dignity of song? Tell, for you can, by what unerring art you wake to finer feelings every heart. In each bright page some truth important give, and bid to future times thy Rambler live. End quote. I take this opportunity to relate the manner in which an acquaintance first commenced between Dr. Johnson and Mr. Murphy. During the publication of the Gray's Inn Journal, a periodical paper which was successfully carried on by Mr. Murphy alone, when a very young man, he happened to be in the country with Mr. Foote, and having mentioned that he was obliged to go to London in order to get ready for the press in one of the numbers of that journal, Foote said to him, quote, "You need not to go on that account. Here is a French magazine, in which you will find a very pretty oriental tale. Translate that, and send it to your printer." End quote. Mr. Murphy, having read the tale, was highly pleased with it, and followed Foote's advice. When he returned to town, this tale was pointed out to him in the Rambler, from whence it had been translated into the French magazine. Mr. Murphy then waited upon Johnson to explain this curious incident. His talents, literature, and gentlemanlike manners were soon perceived by Johnson, and a friendship was formed, which was never broken. Quote, "To Bennet Langton, Esquire, at Langton, near Spilsby, Lincolnshire. Dear Sir, you that travel about the world have more materials for letters than I who stay at home, and should, therefore, write with frequency equal to your opportunities. I should be glad to have all England surveyed by you, if you would impart your observations and narratives as agreeable as your last. Knowledge is always to be wished to those who can communicate it well. While you have been riding and running, and seeing the tombs of the learned, and the camps of the valiant, I have only stayed at home, and intended to do great things which I have not done. Beau went away to Cheshire, and has not yet found his way back. Chambers passed the vacation at Oxford. I am very sincerely solicitous for the preservation or curing of Mr. Langton's sight, and am glad that the surgeon at Coventry gives him so much hope. Mr. Sharp is of opinion that the tedious maturation of the cataract is a vulgar error, and that it may be removed as soon as it is formed. This notion deserves to be considered. I doubt whether it be universally true, but if it be true in some cases, and those cases can be distinguished, it may save a long and uncomfortable delay. Of dear Mrs. Langton you give me no account, which is less friendly, as you know how highly I think of her, and how much I interest myself in her health. I suppose you told her of my opinion, and likewise it was not followed. However, I still believe it to be right. Let me hear from you again, wherever you are, or whatever you are doing. Whether you wander or sit still, plant trees or make rustics, play with your sisters or muse alone, and in return I will tell you the successes of Sheridan, who at this instant is playing Cato, and has already played Richard twice. He had more company the second than the first night, and will make, I believe, a good figure in the whole, though his faults seem to be very many, some of natural deficience, and some of laborious affectation. He has, I think, no power of assuming either that dignity or elegance which some men, who have little of either in common life, can exhibit on the stage. His voice when strained is unpleasing, and when low is not always heard. He seems to think too much on the audience, and turns his face too often to the galleries. However, I wish him well, and among other reasons because I like his wife. Make haste to write to, dear sir, your most affectionate servant, Sam Johnson. October 18th, 1760. End quote. In 1761, Johnson appears to have done little. He was still, no doubt, proceeding in his edition of Shakespeare, but what advances he made in it cannot be ascertained. He certainly was at this time not active, for in his scrupulous examination of himself on Easter Eve he laments, in his too rigorous mode of censuring his own conduct, that his life, since the communion of the preceding Easter, had been, quote, dissipated and useless, unquote. He, however, contributed this year the preface to Rolt's Dictionary of